You're back with David Mackey's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com on the number one listener supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for free. If you're new to Shiny Side Out, you're welcome aboard. This is the tinfoil hat zone, so keep your arms within the vehicle, turn off your personal reality inverters, and please, no flash photography. We're glad you're on board. And we thank you for inviting us into your lives. So follow, subscribe, or otherwise for the appropriate social media platform. We're halfway through show number 503.
3 and 500.
Yes, all of the 5s and 3s. And we asked that you get yourself some merch from the station's website. And the station is freedomslips.com. It's actually pretty cool. You can get maybe get yourself a gift, a thumb drive with survival documents, or a seed pack possibly. You can put them in the freezer the last 20 years. You just follow the instructions for importation of whatever your gift is into your country. Very important that you do that.
Absolutely. And
so
support the station.
Yeah. So this is the second hour of our show. We've hit the daylight savings thing. It's a bit tricky there with some tech. The show bumpers didn't start, so we've just imagined that they did.
Yeah. And look, we're talking about the hypothesis, the expanded version, of course, for show number 500. We have to get through 94 A4 pages of show notes, and it has grown over the years, obviously. And I'm going to check on what the first 100 looked like. But we're on page 13, just for everybody's information. We talked about telomeres. We talked about individual death. Extreme longevity potentially, right? I mean, why do we die? That's what we talked about, right? I mean, individually, that is, right? And the answer is, well, there's no good reason why we should die, unless you fall down a staircase or you smoke like a chimney and abuse your body in many different ways. But if you didn't do any of that, let's say you lived a really, really good life, let's say, right? Let's say you ate all the right foods and the vitamins, and you're really cautious in what you engage in, and you exercise, and you do all of that, and you're not predisposed to maybe cancer or whatever it might be. And the reasonable suggestion should be that you should live a long time. You should live very long time indeed. And you shouldn't age really that badly either, right? And some of us, they age better than others, and that's certainly the truth. But we all have a expiration date of about 120 years. I mean, that's pretty much it for us, right? And the question was, of course, why is that? And the answer is, well, there's no good reason. We have got a built-in kill switch. Individually, we all have built-in kill switches. And as we learned last week, your life is even shorter if your parents went through stress in their lives. So if they're of a lower socioeconomic status, for example, and not having enough money in this kind of culture here is obviously a stressor, then chances are that you're born with shorter telomeres. You're starting behind the 8 ball. You haven't even started your life yet, so there's not even a chance for you to be healthy and all that. You're already starting off with a disadvantage.
That's an amazing concept, really.
It's astounding, simply because you're born into lower socioeconomic tier.
Yeah, so we know that if you have a hard life, your telomeres shorten. But you pass that on to your offspring, and theirs is already shortened.
Yeah.
So
think about that for a second.
Yeah, I know. So you think what about the opposite of that? If you just conceive of this. So if you have a tremendous carefree life, that your telomeres are not disadvantaged, then your children's aren't disadvantaged as well. And there's benefits to having no disadvantage. And if we're seeing this, Mekhi, I think we see a lot of cyclical hardships come time to time, right, within our civilization. And whether they're war or financial, or there's some kind of cataclysm, all of these things they dampen the next generation. The existing one is affected as a primary effect, but the tertiary effect is their children's degradation already before they're born, and then that has to then start to recover again. This is that punctuated equilibrium. Doesn't it lend itself to that? You can see how beneficial it is to have strived really hard to survive in a hardship than to pass traits on. Because remember that other show we did, Mackie, where the memory of a certain color was passed on through multiple generations who never physically saw the color themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that electric shock with color? Fear?
Yeah, no,
and
there's definitely, yeah.
There's a genetic trait passed on that was the skill, and I don't know what it is, but there isn't much data to pass. And if there was only enough data to pass for a certain few elements, one is, we know things that your parents or someone in your family genetically back in time, say, had a fear of clowns, you can have an irrational fear of clowns without ever having seen one.
Yeah, genetic memory is a real thing.
It is absolutely real thing. So if you combine all of these things, the punctuated equilibrium, the genetic trait that you can be passed on, a memory or a physical attribute that helps you get through the same thing that your parents had successfully, or used, maybe it was their greatest skill. However that it's determined, because that's what I would do. If I was writing an AI program to simulate a life form, I would want it to pass on, say, the top 5 traits, right? And those memories or things that worked really well for you, pass them on, pass that top 5. So if you're able to pass those on to the next generation, you can evolve and evolve is a loose term here, Darwinian version of evolve, rather than the random mutations, but rather chosen ones or designed ones onto the next generation for them to flourish in the environment you're in. So punctuated equilibrium really works into that, because whatever you learn to survive, you can pass that on, and it's a thing, right? Even if you have to, even it's learned, or you had to, it was just a natural skill of yours. So here we are back to the 120-year timestamp hard limit that's been programmed into us because the previous generation of immortals just got up to naughty business, right? They couldn't have that anymore. And to give us a sense of, it's like being in detention, or you're grounded. You have a sense of morality, a perspective based on an age limit, right? Imagine if we did live forever, how we'd behave, right?
Oh yeah.
Like a bunch of drunken superheroes.
Like Hancock. Yeah, look, there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, we would have a different perspective, certainly, right? If you were part of an interstellar or intergalactic even civilization, for argument's sake, right? Being immortal would be a prerequisite, because let's assume that light speed truly is the speed limit of the universe. I don't think it is, but let's say
I'll go with you. Yep.
But at relativistic speeds, right? You're away from your potential home for tens or even hundreds of thousands of years, depending on how far you travel and at what speed, right? So, and of course, if there were wormholes, but even if there were wormholes and such, I mean, the universe is so massive. I mean, the observable universe at least, and maybe even it's a multiverse or metaverse, right? And then you would need a lot more time to explore it all, to take it all in, right? And in a 100-year lifespan makes no sense whatsoever for an exploratory species.
Yeah, if you'd stayed away for 100,000 years doing the speed of light and were able to somehow make it home again, your species could have evolved into something completely unrecognizable, because it wouldn't be 100,000 years then; it would be millions of years.
Yeah. And quite possibly, right? And maybe that's why we see these UFOs that haven't changed at all. Maybe it's a static
Yeah.
society, right? Over
Uh-huh.
thousands of years, UFOs haven't changed. But look, we did spend a lot of time talking about the human condition on individual level.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about, well, what about you? Why do you age? And we gave you the answer. This is what happens, right? The other processes, I'm sure there are other elements that come into it, but in my estimation, I'm sure Dave is on the same page here, we have a built-in kill switch. And that kill switch was put there at some point, cosmologically speaking, in the recent past. Okay? So which brings us to the question then, from the individual to the species. How old are we as a species? Human beings, that is. I mean, how long have we been around in one iteration or another? Right? Now, the scientific accepted age limit or age is 300,000 years. When first we did this show, 10 years ago, the hypothesis, it was 100,000 years. Okay, so in 10 years, it went from 100,000 years to 300,000 years. Accepted, scientifically accepted by the mainstream. Yes, Homo sapiens sapiens has been around for 300,000 years. We think, right? That's what.
And that was written September 9th, 2020.
Correct, but 10 years ago it was 100,000 years.
Yeah.
So science has marched on and caught up with our interpretation of what is actually going on here, right? So, right. And so, bones of primitive Homo sapiens, and this is by Nicholas R. Longridge, and he's a senior lecturer of evolutionary biology and paleontology at the University of Bath. And so, bones of primitive Homo sapiens first appeared 300,000 years ago in Africa, with brains as large or larger than ours. They're followed by anatomically modern Homo sapiens at least 200,000 years ago, and brain shape became essentially modern by at least 100,000 years ago. At this point, humans had brain cases similar in size and shape to ours, but don't forget that the older Homo sapiens, primitive ones, I guess, had larger brains than ours. What? Because the fossil record is so patchy, fossils provide only minimum dates. Human DNA suggests even earlier origins for modernity. Okay, comparing genetic differences between DNA in modern people and ancient Africans, it's estimated that our ancestors lived 260,000 to 350,000 years ago. All living humans descended from those people, the theory goes, suggesting that we inherited the fundamental commonalities of our species, our humanity, from them. From them, rather, Dave.
Yes. Southern African ancient genomes estimate modern human divergence to 350 to 260 years ago. This is in line with that prior statement. Ancient DNA pushes human emergence back. Anatomical modern humans evolved in Africa, but pinpointing when has been difficult. Schulbusch and all sequenced 3 ancient African genomes from the Stone Age, about 2,000 years old, and 4 from the Iron Age, that's 300 to 500 years old. One of the oldest samples, sequenced to 13 times coverage, appears most closely to resemble individuals from the present-day San population. However, this individual seems to have lacked genetic contributions from other modern African populations, including pastoralists and farmers, which were observed in modern San individuals. Thus, the earliest divergence between human populations may have occurred some 350 to 260,000 years ago. Now, there's an abstract. Southern Africa is consistently placed as a potential region for the evolution of Homo sapiens. Just understand what that actually means. There's still no definite theory on this. It's so far placed because we found some jawbones, right? We present genome sequences up to 13 times coverage from 7 ancient individuals from KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. The remains of 3 Stone-aged hunter-gatherers, about 2,000 years old, were genetically similar to current-day southern sand groups, and those of 4 Iron Age farmers, 300 to 500 years old, were genetically similar to present-day Bantu language speakers. We estimate, this is the writer, we estimate all modern-day co-sand groups have been influenced by 9 to 30% genetic admixture, that's a new word for me, from East African Eurasians. Using traditional and new approaches, we estimate the first modern human population divergence time between 350 and 260,000 years ago. This estimate increases the deepest diversions among modern humans, coinciding with anatomical developments of archaic humans into modern humans as represented in the local fossil record.
Now, that's an awfully long time. So I want to just put something in there we'll get to a little bit later in more detail. Let's say, for argument's sake, we've been around for 300,000 years, which is, somewhere between 350 and 260. But let's say 300,000 years, for argument's sake. In our present form, with our brain capacity, our ability to reason and, build civilizations. The civilization we are part of now, if you're really generous, you put it back 10,000 years. And you know what? Because there's Göbekli Tepe, let's put it back down, let's put it back 15,000 years. But there are no records, right? There are no written records at all. And then we know that some of the structures and monuments on the planet are much older than that. But let's say our civilization dates back 15,000 years. Starting from nowhere. So there was no civilization, there was no organized cities, there was nothing. There was just people wandering around eating bison and mammoths. That's what they did, right? So it took us 15,000 years to get from that to where we are today. Conquering the stars, hopefully one day, and etc., etc. Now, but we had 20 times as long to do that. Only in the last 15,000 years did we decide that we should do this. Really? So for 300 plus thousand years, we're just content to be as we are. I don't think so. I really don't think so. Certain populations here and there, you've got outliers, sure enough, that could happen, absolutely. But I find it bordering on the ridiculous to assume that ancient civilizations didn't arise in those 300,000 years. Now, civilizations that are completely lost to us now, and some that are still remembered in myth and legend. Okay? And we have those myths and legends. We have them. They're there. So we have been in this prison for a very long time indeed. And we don't remember much of it. So forget about individual death and individual reincarnation. Right? Because when we die, most of us don't remember anything from the past life, as it were. Right? We just don't. It's just how it is. Now, the same is true for our civilizations. Our civilizations come out and then they die, and we have very little memory left of them. Some myths, some legends, sure enough, right? But really far back, nothing, zero. Isn't that astounding? See you later, Acid. Have a good one. There's someone in the chat. So this is really where we are. Like I said, I find it incredulous that we are happy with that kind of postulation. For 300,000 years, we just didn't. Right?
Like a meandering river, Mackie. We didn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Just to share with us what Elon Musk said.
Yeah, he said that if humans were delayed by 5%, meaning if our advancement was delayed by 5%, then we would never have made it into space. And that message is really important because I think it raises the question, what the hell's about to happen? How long is that 5%? Is that 5% going to be what? Why the race to Mars? I think that's some crazy math. I watched a documentary on him and also a couple of things this week with his wife speaking about him in TED Talks. And it was really interesting that he just considers himself an engineer. I actually don't mind him, fellow. But when I look at all of these numbers, Mickey, it's what came out of me. Yeah, was the reminder of what he said. And when you're saying that, if we only go back 14,000 years to just nomadic tribes, hunter-gatherers, and then there was a large cataclysm that occurred, and then we had to recover again from it. If you had 300,000 years to do something, we could have had a number of these same risings to technology.
There's another school of thought to the Elon Musk point you just made.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, by the way, talking about the 300,000 years. But let's look at it much more simply, and maybe in timescales people can understand as well. Let's assume that the Greek civilization, as it were, did not decline and fall, for argument's sake, but they kept on going. But there was a 2,000-year head start on where we are today, for argument's sake. Or let's assume for a second that there was no dark age in Europe, that the plague didn't ravage European populations, and trade and knowledge exchange with the East started well before the fall of Constantinople in 1476, right? Well before then.
Istanbul was once Constantinople.
That's right, because it was only the conquest by the Turks of Constantinople, or the Ottomans, that led to this influx of Eastern thought, Eastern scholars, Eastern knowledge into Europe. These are people trying to escape the Turkish invasion, which led, of course, to the Renaissance, the rebirth, as it were. But if this didn't have, if the Renaissance had happened 1,000 years earlier, for argument's sake, or 2,000 years earlier, can you imagine where we would be today? The funny thing is this: we probably have the Apollo missions would probably still be named Apollo missions, because we are using Greek and Roman mythology to name our spacecraft. Right? Yes, it's just what we do. But we would be 2,000 years potentially further ahead, because a lot of knowledge was lost. We're looking at the mechanism of Antikythera, for example, 2,000 years old. Right? It's a complete nonsense to say it was a prototype. It was too advanced. It was too complicated. It's a complete brain fart, in my opinion, to say, it was just a single prototype, because this is the math behind it. A ship in the Mediterranean sinks 2,000 years ago near the island of Antikythera. It's carrying a whole bunch of amphorae, including this particular, let's call it a star computer, because that's what it is. A manual, an analog computer, but still there it is. And it sinks. The ship sinks, goes down, right? And then 2,000 years later, some sponge divers go down there, diving around. They find the wreck. Oh, that's pretty cool. And they bring up, a couple of stuffs, amphorae and this and that, and they bring up this heavily encrusted and corroded object as well. Now, what are the odds? What are the odds that the single mechanism of Antikythera, the single one that existed, goes down on a ship and is found 2,000 years later by some sponge divers, and then makes it into the museum in Athens, where German Walter Koenig looks at it and goes, oh, this looks interesting, and he starts x-raying it, and it goes, oh, this is really interesting, and on it goes. The math that is involved here of probability, I'm talking about probability math, is staggering against. The odds are so against that we shouldn't even discuss it. Okay?
You've been using the improbability drive again, haven't you?
That's what we've been doing, right? So it is clear that even in the small space of 2,000 years, right? Roughly,
look how much tech we lost.
Yeah, that's what let's call it 50, 60 generations. I mean, if you go maximum lifespan for humans, right? Probably more like 150 generations.
Yeah,
but even in that tiny space, 2,000 years, forget 300,000 years, we have lost so much. We could be so much further ahead, but we're not. Yeah, we're not. That's really the point I'm trying to make here. We are not anywhere near optimum, anywhere near pinnacle, right? Yeah. And there's so much time that went before us. It is hard to imagine. I mean, 2,000 years we can sort of understand. Okay, I get it. I mean, I've seen the ruins. I've seen the Acropolis. I've seen the Colosseum. I understand 2,000 years a little bit. I get it, right? But for the longest time, we also didn't know how the Romans made their concrete. Roman concrete, 2,000-year-old concrete is better than our concrete. Now we think it's because they used a whole bunch of additives in the concrete, specifically from igneous rock. Anyway, the point is, there's a lot of knowledge that was lost. We spent a whole show cycle on this, Dave, looking at all the ancient tech that was lost.
What about that?
Right? So,
what about that iron post, Mickey, in India?
Oh yeah, doesn't rust. What?
No.
Why doesn't it? It should. It should. No, it's not. It doesn't. Why? How? Oh, I don't know. It's just strange. So let's be very clear here, right? That's only 2,000 years, or 3,000 years, or 4,000 years, or 5,000 years. 300,000 years is a whole different animal. It's a scale. It's hard to comprehend. And I will take you further down the rabbit hole, saying it's actually millions, if not tens of millions of years, because of some of the evidence that has been unearthed, literally unearthed, not figuratively, right? I know, right? But look, there's only a couple of data points I want to share with our listenership here from this, and then I would like you, once we've done that, you can take it from, let's assume, 100,000 years. But I do want to share just a couple of points here in this text. So fossils attributed to Homo sapiens along with stone tools, so not just fossils but tools, dated to approximately 300,000 years ago. They were found at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. Okay. And that's the earliest fossil evidence for anatomically modern Homo sapiens. Okay, 177,000-year-old jawbone fossil was discovered in Israel in 2017, and that's the oldest human remains found outside of Africa. However, in July 2019, anthropologists reported the discovery of 210,000-year-old remains of Homo sapiens and 170,000-year-old remains of Homo neanderthalensis in the Apidima cave in the Peloponnese in Greece, more than 150,000 years older than previous Homo sapien finds in Europe. This is not a little leap. This is pushing it back 150,000 years.
That's almost doubling it. That's right.
It's insane, right? So I just wanted to share that with you, because these timelines are going back further and further and further. But if you want to, Dave, take us. This is page 17. And okay, please take it, my friend.
So, Neanderthals emerged from the Homo heidelbergensis lineage at about the same time, 300,000 years. Patrilineal and matrilineal, most recent common ancestors, and let's call those MRCAs, of living humans roughly between 200 and 100,000 years ago, with some estimates on the patrilineal MRCA somewhat higher, ranging up to or upwards of 250 to 500,000 years ago. And you can see this math just keeps getting further and further back. Homo sapiens, or Homo sapien Idaltu in Ethiopia, a wash river near present-day Herto village, practice mortuary rituals. That's really interesting. 130 to 80,000 years ago, marine isotope stage 5. Is it E, man? Well, that'll do. Modern human presence in southern Africa and West Africa. Appearance of mitochondrial haplogroup, MT haplogroup L2. Next, Mekki.
This is the time of 80 to 50,000 years ago. It's MIS4, beginning of the Upper Paleolithic, so the Upper Old Stone Age. And there's early evidence for behavioral modernity, appearance of MT haplogroups M and N, southern dispersal migration out of Africa, proto-Australoid peopling of Oceania. No, we don't think so. There's actually really interesting research being undertaken looking at Australia, or the out of Australia theory, I should say. Again, completely ignored by mainstream, as are the pyramids, by the way, which we have in Australia, but that's all good. Also an archaic admixture from Neanderthals in Eurasia, from Denisovans in Oceania with trace amounts in Eastern Eurasia, and from an unspecified African lineage of archaic humans in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as an interbred species of Neanderthals and Denisovans in Asia and Oceania. So what that means is, at that point, we interbred with a whole range of our, well, cousins, really, not different species, same species.
Only if she looks pretty like.
Oh, she's a cousin. She's pretty looking all right. Let's move to Shelbyville. No, but the thing is, Manhattan, Shelbyville. But the thing is that for the longest time, I know when I went to school, right? Again, the human evolutionary chart was drawn up there, and Neanderthal was one of our ancestors. So Neanderthal, we all came from the one of our ancestors, primitive Neanderthal with broad shoulders, heavy brow ridge, etc., etc. Bigger brain than ours, actually, believe it or not. But it was understood to be an ancestor of ours. but that is absolutely go on.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that's absolutely not true. Neanderthal interbred with us. We didn't displace or replace Neanderthal. We simply, diluted Neanderthal into us.
Yeah.
We interbred to the point where it was just, us, I guess.
Just like blonde Mickey.
Bingo. Yeah.
That's the real thing. It's a real thing right now. Mickey, this there's something really crazy here, right? And that is tinfoil hat zone, by the way.
Yeah.
We're tracking human lineage here, or Homo sapiens sapiens.
Yes.
Only, but then we have these really weird points, and I'm going to turn this into a segue. That we then bred with Neanderthals and Denisovians.
Yes.
All right. In Asia and Oceania. But hang on a minute. Isn't that just like the story, right, of Adam and Eve and their children who then went off to another town and interbred with those people?
Yes. Good point.
Hang on a minute. This is the thing that got me kicked out of Sunday school. Right? And I kid you not, that's actually my parents were asked that I not return. That best that he asked too many questions. Right? And my point was, if Adam and Eve were the first humans, who did the sons breed with? They went to another town that already existed, and they bred with those people. Hang on a minute. So humans left Africa, but then bred with species they found in Asia and Oceania. And the Neanderthal and the Denisovans. Hang on a minute. They were already there. This is the same point. It's the same story. Isn't it odd?
100%. You hit the nail on the head, my friend.
You've got to think about I love the romance of eating, not eating, knowledge, whatever. Right? You're in a beautiful place, and then you've got to walk around aimlessly, like on the Simpsons rendition of Adam and Eve, walk around in the desert just on the outside of the fence. Oddly, these are very, very similar stories.
And you're 100% correct. See, and look, I don't want to go into this too much, but since you brought it up, you only have yourself to blame.
Take the floor, my esteemed co-host.
No, but the Bible, in my opinion, gives us a good insight into some histories. Mileage in the chat room. Yes, the guys on A are from and in fact in Australia as we speak.
Oh no, Mileage. We're crisis actors because Australia does not exist.
I'm sitting on the wall that walls off the Antarctic. It's not true. No. And it tells us a story, a very specific story, but it is not the human story. It is the story of those people. And the Old Testament, you're going to hate me for it, is the story of the Jewish people. That's what it is. It is a genealogy of the Jewish people as they understand it. That's what it is. The New Testament, completely different thing. nothing to do really with the Old Testament, but that's what it is. So the Old Testament also, if you look at it and you look at the older source texts that I think are the source texts that Dave and I have shared with you, the Epic of Atrahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, etc., etc., much more detailed and much more logical and much more or much easier to understand. Oh, okay, that's what that makes sense, right? Because I mean, God just created Adam and Eve in the Bible. Why? Why did God create Adam and Eve? I don't know. It seemed like a good idea at the time, right? Whereas the older texts,
why? Because there was already people.
Exactly, but the older texts are much more detailed and descriptive into and also. Oh, and then the sons of God took the women of the earth to be their brides, blah 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 blah. And then with the Gigi and the interaction with the Homo or the humans at the time, that makes all of that makes a lot more sense.
That's right.
In fact, we were a hybrid species, as it were, between the Anunnaki, Gigi, and ourselves. That's a thing, right? But look, we did a whole show cycle of this. I'm not going to repeat this here. But it is certainly important to understand that all of these evolutionary myths and religions and stories only tell you partial stories, right? They're not telling you the story. If you really believe, okay, hey, that's cool, that's who you are. I dig it and I respect it. But I personally do not. I do not believe that it tells you everything, because if it did, then the Bible, according to Bishop Ussher, says that the world was created 4004 BC. I think it was the Thursday afternoon, right? You look Bishop Ussher up. He calculated the creation date from the Bible genealogy, etc., etc.
Yeah, he can do what he likes. Good luck with that.
I know, right?
Because dinosaur fossils are just here to confuse us, right? To make us think.
Yeah, no, but there's a story I shared with you many times. But yeah, no, they are. Right? God made them all to fool you.
That's right. Yeah, into thinking there was dinosaurs. Yeah.
Where are we? Sorry, where are we up in the text?
I am.
I think it's your turn.
Me.
Yes, that's what I thought. Go ahead.
So 50 to 25,000 years ago, behavioral modernity develops, according to the Great Leap Forward, in air quotes, theory. Extinction of Homo floresiensis. No. Yeah, that'll do. Yes, that'll do.
That'll do.
Mr. Snurb. M168 mutation carried by all non-African males. Appearance of the MT haplogroup U and K. Peopling of Europe. I like peopling. It's like annexing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The peopling of the North Asian mammoth steppe and the Paleolithic art. We've got the extinction of Neanderthals and other archaic human variants, with possible survival of hybrid populations in Asia and Africa. Appearance of the Y haplogroup R2, MT haplogroups J and X. Mickey, back in the previous period, the 80 to 50 that you were talking about here, there was I think it was the one before that, haplogroup L2. So if you don't know where Tartaria was, because it but it was, and it seemed to be deleted from our history books, I believe that was the L2 haplogroup.
Yeah, I think that would make sense.
And it's also the Paracas skull origin haplogroup L2.
Yeah. Again,
makes sense.
I do. Yeah, but look, I do believe that the human tapestry, I like to call it, the human tapestry was a lot more complex and intricate than what we see today. Today, I mean, we have different races. Of course, we do. I think back in the day, 10, 15, 20, 25, 100,000 years ago,
like almost species differential.
Yeah, almost. But I mean, there were massive differences, and this is actually coming through from myths, legends, and fairy tales. We have memories of that echo through time.
Yeah,
we do have that, right? I mean, I say it again. Whenever you look at a myth or a legend or a fairy tale, you tend to ignore it. You shake it off. Yeah, sure, whatever. Bear in mind, these were delivered orally and through generations. All right, and there was a reason for that. These stories lived; they kept living, and they kept information alive.
Mm-hmm.
I give you a simple example. Right now, everybody will laugh at the notion of a unicorn. You're like, what a crazy notion, Mackie. What a crazy thing to think that unicorns could possibly be real.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me just look at it this way for a second. Number one, there's a rhinoceros. You might be familiar with it. It has a couple of horns in the front of its skull. It does. It's a thing, right? Now, it's not a unicorn, you know. However, there's a creature called the narwhal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a whale. It's a whale, right? It lives in the ocean. And it has a unicorn-like horn set on its head.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
But
to
it's
be clear,
the length of its body.
yeah, it's not a small horn, and also whales. So scientists tell us by biological evolutionaries, they tell us that whales were in fact at some point land animals.
Mm-hmm.
They were land animals. They decided to go back in the water. I mean, okay. It's adaptation. Okay, it's adaptation. I dig it. I can see that happening, right, over long periods of time. But that means that at one point, this narwhal was a land creature, and it has a unicorn-like horn. It does. It just does. Okay. Now, is this a memory of what happened before? I don't know. But my point is, do not dismiss something out of hand simply because you should. Or you think you should, because everybody says so, right, Dave? Everybody knows that's true, and everybody knows that's not true, and we all know this. Well, who told you? Who makes up these rules?
Look, it's like dragons, Mickey. I totally believe dragons existed.
Yeah. Yep. And why not? We are finding new creatures, we're finding new living creatures all the time. Forget the fossil record,
That's
and
right.
we already have, and we've spoken about how leaky and gappy the fossil record is.
I know, right?
95 or 98% of all fossils are marine fossils in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That many. Why? Because marine fossils form under much better or much more
low
beneficial
oxygen levels, and they're sedimented over. Mm-hmm.
Bingo. And in fact, a lot easier than. So if someone dies on the ground, and just in the grass in the forest, there's nothing sedimenting it. There's nothing going on top of it. It's just scattered by scavengers or whatever it might be. That's why we find our best fossils of land animals, either in riverbeds, ancient
cataclysmic. They're immediately like washed by a flood and sedimented onto straight away.
Yeah, or buried by ash or lava, or whatever it might have been. Absolutely, 100% correct. So that's really the this is important to understand. So we don't know. We dig around, we find things, we don't find things, we think we know. We don't know. Right? We've got some theories, and that's awesome. But don't dismiss something that comes to you through story, because there's a reason these stories existed and in fact are still existing. There's a reason for this. There's a memory of these things still within us. But look, that brings us to about 25,000 years ago to the modern times, right? So last 25,000 years, that's when the Minatogawa men or people evolved or developed. These are the proto-Mongoloids, about 20,000 years ago or so. It's also the last glacial maximum. It's the Epipaleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the Holocene. Those are the three ages, scientifically speaking, that encapsulated by this time frame. It also now, my favorite, the peopling of the Americas. I think we've got evidence to the contrary, but nonetheless, mainstream science still says, oh no, that's when the Americans were populated. Okay. Also, the appearance of the Y haplogroup R1A and MT haplogroups V and T. Various recent divergence associated with environmental pressures, for example, light-skinned Europeans and East Asians, okay, after 30,000 years. Inuit adaptation to a high-fat diet and cold climate about 20,000 years ago. Also, apparently, the extinction of late surviving archaic humans at the beginning of the Holocene, about 12,000 years ago. Again, coincides with the end of the last glacial period, right, or the last ice age. Accelerated divergence due to selection pressures and populations participating in the Neolithic revolution after 12,000 years ago. East Asian types of ADH1B associated with rice domestication or lactase persistence. Right.
But that period of time, 12,000 years ago, was when there was a huge cataclysm.
Bingo. That's exactly right. It's talking about, massive pressures, accelerated divergence due to selection pressures. So it's
That's
all
how
lining
they've
up.
worded it.
Yeah, I know, right? Because this is the scientifically accepted, what we just shared with you. That's the scientifically accepted timeline, right? But
Yeah.
let's assume 100,000 years, enough for 5 civilizations like ours or similar.
Mhm.
However, humanity is likely a lot older. And I know this is where we will lose a few listeners. The great antiquity of humanity does not fly in the face of known science. We know there was a bottleneck event for the human population. This means there was a massive reduction of breeding pairs at that time, right? Dave, I think we've got enough time. You can maybe share at least the one bottleneck event here, the Toba thing, if you like.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
So let's assume 100,000 years, enough time for 5 civilizations like ours or similar, however. Is that what you're talking about?
That's what and then genetic bottleneck in humans.
Yeah, that's right. So humanity is likely a lot older, and I know this is where we all lose a few listeners. However, a great antiquity of humanity does not fly in the face of known science. We know that there was a bottleneck event for the human population. This means that there was a massive reduction in breeding pairs at the time. I think I'm having deja vu. You read that already. Genetic bottlenecks in humans. We'll cut that out in post. The Toba super eruption, youngest Toba Tuff, or simply the YTT2, was a super volcanic eruption that occurred sometime between 69,000 and 77,000 years ago at the site of the present-day Lake Toba, that's in Sumatra, Indonesia. It is recognized as one of the Earth's largest known eruptions. The related catastrophe hypothesis holds that this event caused a global volcanic winter of about 6 to 10 years and possibly 1,000-year-long cooling episode. That's really extraordinary. The Toba catastrophe theory suggests that a bottleneck of the human population occurred 70,000 years ago, reducing the total human population to about 15,000 individuals when Toba erupted and triggered a major environmental change, including a volcanic winter. The theory is based on geologic evidence for a sudden climatic change, and so at that time, and coalescence of some genes, including the mitochondrial DNA, the Y chromosome, and some nuclear genes, as well as the relatively low level of genetic variation among present-day humans. For example, according to one hypothesis, the human mitochondrial DNA, which is maternally inherited, and Y chromosome DNA, paternally inherited, coalesce around 140,000 to 60,000 years ago, respectively. This suggests that the female line ancestry of all present-day humans traces back to a single female mitochondrial Eve at around 140,000 years ago, and the male line to a single male, the Y chromosomal Adam, at 60 to 90,000 years ago. However, such a coalescence is genetically expected and does not necessarily indicate a population bottleneck because mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome DNA are only a small part of the human genome and are atypical in that they are inherited exclusively through the mother or through the father, respectively. Most genes are inherited randomly from either the father or mother. The father. Hello, father. Hello, mother.
Hello, father. We are here in Camp Granada.
The connections my poor brain has thus cannot be traced to either matrilineal or patrilineal ancestry. Other genes display coalescence points from 2 million to 60,000 years ago, thus casting doubt on the existence of recent and strong bottlenecks. Other possible explanations for limited genetic variation among today's humans include a transplanting bottle or long bottleneck rather than a catastrophic environmental change. This would be consistent with suggestions that in sub-Saharan Africa, human populations dropped to as low as 2,000 individuals, or perhaps as long as 100,000 years before numbers began to increase in the late Stone Age. Maggie.
Yeah, look, I think that's really interesting to contemplate just for a second here, right? There are bottlenecks, and I think it's the mitochondrial leaf and the Y chromosomal atom. I think they're very strong indications of bottlenecks, in my opinion. Right?
Really?
Yes, there could be.
The author didn't think so.
Yeah, I know, but there could be. I mean, sure, certainly there could be other bottlenecks, and we know that they have occurred as well in the past. But it is really interesting, right?
So think about this, Maggie. Think about this, right? So there's a catastrophe, and the Y chromosome is made for males. Something happens, and we have a Y chromosome rather than two X's, both having an X each. And they're talking about the Y chromosome disappearing shortly in human history. In the next 100,000 years, it will probably be gone entirely. Oddly, whatever caused that to happen, and that would have meant that it would have been the dominant gene. So if they happen to find any other stragglers around, like i.e. end of the world, I'm the only person alive, we're the only couple, and then suddenly some strangers walk into the group, that would then be passed down through the children and take over. And if that bottleneck occurred because of those individuals, I think that's really important to remember, that there might not have been only those two individuals, but there might have been a group.
Yeah. No, but like that's look, it's I find it fascinating. And
what the hell happened so bad, Mackie, that suddenly your chromosomes are changed?
Well, look,
I'm still alive.
That come to mind. I think what we're looking here is interference. I think what we're looking here is the. I think we're looking at war. I think we're looking at deliberate manipulation. I think we're looking at a raft of things here. The destruction of massive civilizations across the solar system, in fact, maybe beyond. A weeding out, a thinning out of the human species to make it more uniform, more simple in many ways, right? Because I believe very strongly that the Anunnaki are not a representative of aliens from another solar system. I do believe very strongly that they're in fact homegrown, an earlier form of Homo sapiens, if you will, right? And then there was a lot of, in my opinion, again, a lot of genetic engineering that went on at the time. A lot of things were done. I mean, the cheetah is the prime example for a genetically engineered animal, in my opinion, right? And many other things went as well. And the Anunnaki clearly had a huge civilization, but I think it's safe to assume that they weren't the only ones on the planet at the time or in the solar system. There would have been conflict points, just like they are today. They're conflicting civilizations. I mean, people talk about the Atlantis and the Harappan civilization going to war, right? Which is some belief described in surviving Indian epics, right? So there are certainly indications that many civilizations have existed before this one. There's evidence aplenty that genetic manipulation has happened as well. There's evidence aplenty that these civilizations reached pinnacles of achievement and technology that we can only now begin to understand, never mind do as well or equal. Okay, I think I mean, some of these, if you look at the Indian writings, some of these gods, as it were, had their own flying machines. There's scores and scores of different Vimanas described. They fly under, they can move underwater. They fly in space. They fly through the air. They can move on land. These are multi-purpose vehicles, right? And something that we only aspire to at the moment. Obviously, it's hard for us to move between different media, in water, space, earth, and so forth, and air. And we haven't reached that level of advancement yet. And technology probably was also different. They used different sources of energy, probably. They had different modes of scientific research, potentially. They maybe never made the mistake of separating the supernatural, we like to call it, from the mechanistic worldview, right? So just bear that in mind, because this is a lot of time we're talking here, guys. I mean, our current way of counting time hasn't been with us for very long. We're only counting back to 2,000 years. Other civilizations on the planet, like the Chinese, the Indians, they count time very differently to us.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Jewish calendar too. I mean, they're in very, very different years to the year we are. I mean, we just in the common era. I guess I don't know. It was a convenience thing, and because the Europeans were so brutal in the suppression of everything else, that we've adopted the Christian calendar.
Yay! The bumper's playing.
The pumper is playing. Look, don't go away. Jerba is having an awesome show, I'm sure, after this.
Yeah.
And next week, we're going to talk about genetic bottlenecks in other mammals.
And apart from that, we're going to talk about